Welcome to the Outliers Project podcast. I'm your host, Molly Hawkins, and this show is all about conversations with people who have chosen a different path and pursued something that they believe in. Now, if you've listened to this show before, you've probably heard me talk about wolves. Now, a few years ago, I picked up a copy of this book called American Wolf, thinking I was reading a book about wildlife. But what I didn't expect was that it would send me down this massive rabbit hole that eventually became much bigger than wolves. The deeper I've gotten into things, the more I realize that wolves sit at the center of conversations about ecology, public lands, politics, belonging, conflict, and coexistence. They've become such a passion of mine that I'm actually working on a much bigger project exploring those ideas. Stay tuned on that one. But when talking to folks about wolves, the name Taylor Rabe just kept coming up. Taylor's known for her time as a biological science technician with the Yellowstone Wolf Project. For roughly the last 7 years, she spent her days tracking, observing, researching, and educating people about one of the most misunderstood animals in North America, if not the world now. Outside of her research, she has focused on education and public outreach, helping people connect with individual wolves and helping them understand them not as something that needs to be managed, but as living animals with families, personalities, challenges, and stories of their own. She's also a part of a new generation of conservationists helping broaden who gets represented in wildlife conservation and who sees themselves belonging in these spaces. Recently, I was lucky enough to sit down with her in Yellowstone National Park, and we got a chance to talk about wolves, Yellowstone, conservation, storytelling, representation, and what spending thousands of hours watching wolves can teach us about ourselves. Let's get into it. Taylor, thanks for having me down here. I'm so excited to be in Yellowstone and to have gotten the opportunity to spend some time with you and to hear your story and to be able to share it with other people.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so for people who don't know who you are or know nothing about you, how would you describe Taylor Rabe?
Oh gosh, I'm a follower of wolves. I'm a traveler, an adventurer, an educator. I'm also a dog mom and a wife, and I'm proud to be in my brown skin. So I'm a black woman kind of navigating an unusual landscape.
I love that question. It's always interesting to hear how people perceive themselves, and you seem very comfortable in who you are and in your own skin, and it's cool to hear that.
I think it's interesting because I just turned 30 years old, and I feel like it took me 30 years to feel comfortable in my skin and to feel like someone that others could look up to and, to potentially see themselves in. So I feel good to finally be here.
Hell yeah. I love hearing that. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a bit. But for folks who have never been to Yellowstone, I'm hoping everyone can hear these chirping birds in the background. But can you describe Yellowstone? I know that's a really tough question.
Yellowstone is the most magical place, I think, in the lower 48, especially as an animal lover. There's no other place in North America that you can see bison, grizzly bears, wolves, black bears, elk, moose in a single frame. And so I think that's so magical. But then also having the greatest geothermal activity on the planet is what makes Yellowstone so unique. The first national park. It's a hot spot for people from all over the world. And so I feel very fortunate to call this place home.
We're here in your current home, but I want to go back 30 years or maybe at least 20 and can you start by talking about your upbringing and how did you get here? Were animals always a part of your life?
Yeah, I grew up in northeastern Ohio, right along Lake Erie, about 45 minutes east of Cleveland. I'd always had a fascination with animals. I grew up having, tons of backyard cats and things that I would mess around with. But I grew up in a really rural, small town, predominantly white. I am 50% black, 50% white, and so I grew up with my white side of my family. I was raised by my grandmother, who I love very much. We have a great relationship, but I think, having this fascination with animals, I can think back as early as, 6, 7 years old, watching the wild thornberries, dreaming about being Eliza Thornberry and being able to talk to animals. And I think that that's really what kind of sparked this passion in me. But then kind of navigating middle school and even getting into high school and thinking about, what would come next and not having anyone to look up to who looked like me. I remember, dreaming about being Jane Goodall or part of the primates, right? But they're white women, and I had a really hard time finding someone that kind of represented myself in the wildlife science field, which makes it hard to kind of push forward and hope for a career in this path.
So what was your relationship with nature and like at that point? Because you're literally spending, 16 hours plus out in the outdoors on a, given day,
Yeah, I guess growing up, near big cities, really my only exposure that I had to wildlife was going to the zoo. I grew up going to the Cleveland Zoo. I loved it. And I dreamed of working in zoos one day, just kind of being around animals that I loved. At the time, giraffes were my biggest fascination. And I remember my mom, she ended up flying us down to Florida and getting me like an all-exclusive encounter with giraffes at one of the zoos there, and it was, the highlight of my life at the time. And so, yeah, I had always been interested in wild critters, just didn't really know about how, kind of make that happen for myself.
Giraffes. What was it about giraffes?
I don't know. Their long necks, they're just so, like, mythical and, kind of this, like, unicorn that I didn't think I'd ever have the opportunity to really observe or view in the wild. And so at the time, the zoo was the closest thing that I had about, kind of getting the chance to be next to this animal that kind of made me feel alive when I was amongst it.
Now, have you gotten any adult encounters with giraffes since?
Oh, yeah. I was very fortunate that during my undergrad, my grandmother made it happen that I could study abroad down in Kruger National Park in South Africa. So I got to see giraffes in the wild, and it truly was the most magical experience ever. And since then, I've been to Africa many, many times. It's my happy place. It's a place that feels like home for me. And yeah, I just feel my best self when I'm there.
Holy shit, if anybody has heard Jane Goodall's story, it kind of sounds a little, didn't she go down there when she was young, and then, or she had this experience and then ended up going back to school and back up here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel I'm so young, but I feel so rich in experiences. I've gotten to live lives that people probably never would have experienced. And so, yeah, I just feel so grateful.
Okay, so we talked about your relationship with nature growing up. And, I'm curious, I think you already kind of nodded to it, but tell me, who are some of your role models growing up?
Yeah, I think I was, looking up to the primates, right? Jane Goodall, Beirut Gildakis. I had always had this fascination with wildlife. And so seeing these women, out in the field amongst these primates is something that, I hoped for myself. But as an African-American woman, I did not see that representation when I was looking for, fellow scientists or other people that I could follow to potentially, reach out to or look up to kind of moving forward in my next career path.
Yeah, that's also something, when I was young, I really loved animals. And, I thought about, especially as I got into the later years of high school, imagining what my career was going to look like. You're getting asked those questions. I still didn't know all the possibilities in this space, too. So I can imagine that's doubly hard because you're like, okay, how can I take this passion, and turn it into something? And you're hearing like, well, you need to make a career, from the adults in your life. So you're probably like caught between, okay.
Well, it's crazy because, even though I loved animals, when I went into college, I was not pursuing anything that had to do with the environment, nature, animals. I actually started my undergrad pursuing a nursing degree. And I think, because just as you said, there is this thought of like, you need to make money, you need to be able to support yourself if you ever have a family. And I think, growing up, being raised by my grandmother, she did well for herself. And so I always had anything that I ever wanted. But, my mom struggled. My dad was in and out of prison. And for me, we never owned a home. My mom never owned a home. And that was something that I would not compromise on. And I knew going into the wildlife world, I likely wouldn't be able to give that to myself. And so I did follow this nursing path, only for the money, right? It had nothing to do with a passion. I don't want to help people, right? I much prefer the animals and being amongst the wildlife. And so I did kind of find myself in this like rut of, following a dream, but then still being able to provide a life for myself.
Okay, so let's talk about the pivot. How did you end up in Yellowstone?
Yeah, I did about 2 years of my nursing degree, and I just knew that was not something that I was interested in. I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And so after talking to my grandmother, my boyfriend at the time, he was pursuing a wildlife degree. And I just realized, I wanted to follow my heart and follow something that was going to make me happy, whether or not it was going to make me a large income. And so I did decide to go the zoology route. I ended up pursuing a degree in zoology and graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's of that. But growing up in Ohio, when you mention anything about wanting to work with wildlife or animals, basically the only two options given to me were zookeeper or vet. And I did not think that I had the mental capacity to go through vet school. And so I did go the zookeeping route. And it ended up being just a really sad time in my life. Ended up kind of unraveling things about the zoo world that I wasn't necessarily familiar with, and just kind of like unearthing things that really hurt my heart. And so after working in zoos for a bit, and seeing some of these things come to light that I didn't know previously, I kind of vowed to work with wild animals only. And so my partner Jack, he was in Yellowstone chasing cougars and wolves and doing all of these epic adventures. And he encouraged me to come out here and see what it was all about. And I did. And once you step foot into Yellowstone, it's really hard to leave.
Can you talk about your role while at Yellowstone and talk about how you got into that role?
Yeah, so I drove across the country with one of my childhood best friends, my dogs. We got here, and my very first day here, it was mid-February. If you know anything about Yellowstone in the winter, that's negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 5-6 feet of snow on the ground. And I was at a birthday party for someone that I didn't know at the time was going to become my boss and end up changing my life. But we were at this birthday party. It was a sledding party, and I was trying to ski for the very first time, wiping out the entire time. And then after a bit, I went down to where the picnic area was happening, and I had just mentioned to some of these older gentlemen sitting there that I had an interview with the nonprofit associated with the park, Yellowstone Forever. And it was to be a guide for the park, a naturalist. And I was so petrified because for my interview, I needed to talk about something related to the park for 20 minutes in front of a panel of people. And I had never done something like that. And I was literally panicking. Like, I did not think that I could do it. And then the gentleman there, who was completely covered in ice all over his beard, his name is Dr. Nathan Varley. He offered me a job on the spot to work as a naturalist for his company, Yellowstone Wolf Tracker. And I don't think he realized it at the time. I didn't realize it, but that would kind of be this door into a world that I was unfamiliar with, but that would also ultimately kind of shape the trajectory of my life and my career.
Okay. Wow. So while at Yellowstone Wolf Tracker, what did you learn that maybe surprised you?
Yeah, I think first I just want to kind of backtrack and mention, a lot of people will know me for my work with wolves and the stuff, my passion for wolves. But I want to emphasize that when I moved to Yellowstone, and even when I got my job with Yellowstone Wolf Tracker, I did not like wolves. And I would have never chosen to study wolves.
Wait, when you say you did not like wolves, you mean you did not like them? Or
I
you
mean,
just didn't care
I had no interest in studying wolves or large carnivores. I was indifferent, right? And so I would have never gone out of my way to study wolves or care to watch them or see them. And I remember it was one of my first days in the park, and I had ran into Jeremy Sundaraj, who ends up playing a huge role in my life. But he had showed me the 8 Mile pack, my very first pack of wolves, over near the Petrified Tree area of Yellowstone. And, they just kind of looked like specks. I didn't really care to watch them. I looked for a couple seconds and then went and sat back in the car. And so now, 7 years later, when I think back on that encounter, That was one of the most epic wolf sightings ever. I'd never seen the 8 Mile Pack there again. It was close viewing, right? But at the time, I was more fascinated with ungulates. I wanted to study the bison, the elk, the moose. That's where my passion was, and that's where I would have chosen my focus to be. And it wasn't until I was literally thrown to the wolves, right, with Wolf Tracker, that I kind of got forced into watching these animals and sharing them with people. Because they are so charismatic and, such a family unit, you can't help but fall in love with them. And that's kind of what started my story and the reason that I kind of am where I am now.
So then you're at Yellowstone Wolf Tracker, you're falling in love with wolves. Can you talk about what eventually led to what people know you for is your time at the Yellowstone Wolf Project?
Yeah, so during my time at Wolf Tracker, I was working full-time there as a naturalist, and in my spare time, which was 3-4 days a week, I would be volunteering simultaneously with the Yellowstone Wolf Project, working alongside Jeremy Sundaraj. Jeremy would so graciously take me out into the park every day, and he quite literally taught me everything that there is for me to know about wolves, Yellowstone wolves, what it means to be a scientist, and educate and share wolves with the general public. And so he did that for me for 3 years, where he drove me around every day so I could learn all that I could. And so while I was guiding and working as a volunteer for the project, it kind of turned into this conflict of interest. So I would have clients who would want these epic close wolf encounters, to have the chance to photograph wolves at a close distance, just experience these intimate moments with wolves. And then the very next day, I would be hazing those same wolves that I just let my clients have these intimate moments with. And so I really needed to kind of dig within myself and figure out what I wanted from this. And I realized that for me, I cared far more about the well-being of the animal, educating people about what it means to coexist with wolves and how beneficial they are to the landscape, that I ultimately made the decision to leave my Wolf Tracker position and hopefully get a full-time job with the project.
Wow. So you left without a full-time commitment.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember going into Doug Smith's office and quite literally begging him to hire me. And he had made the comment, well, guiding's way more lucrative than the Wolf Project will be. You're going to be making a mistake to leave the guiding to come do this, right? And I basically told him it wasn't about the money for me. It was about, the education, what it means and how it feels to share these animals that I love with others. And the very next day I went back into the field and I ran into Rick McIntyre, world-renowned wolf watcher, one of the greatest men on earth. And he had asked me, he said, "Taylor, do you want to work for the Wolf Project?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "Okay, I will fund your first year with the sales of my books."
No shit. Dude, first of all, for anyone who knows anything about wolves, you just name dropped two of the most prolific names in wolves currently, and probably will be a legacy of the wolf research and reintroduction forever. So that's so rad. And that's crazy. I hadn't heard that. That is pretty amazing. Wow. So you guys are pretty close.
Yeah, Rick has been a mentor of mine. Again, he's the reason I got this job. He put me into contact with a nonprofit, Conservation Nation, whose entire mission is bringing underrepresented communities into the wildlife field. And both Conservation Nation and Rick saw something in me that I might not have seen in myself, and they made the decision to fully fund my first year of the project.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, before I really am excited to talk about wolves, but I want to kind of dovetail off that a little bit. So, you talked about underrepresented people in conservation. Talk a little bit about that. Is that a thing? And how many people are, how many jobs? First of all, there's not a lot of jobs. I think about the job that you have been, living in for the last, 7 years or so. And those are just coveted jobs in general, let alone, finding somebody like that looks like yourself. That's got to be incredibly unique.
Yeah, I think, it's not a secret that the wildlife field is primarily run by white males, and because this is such an underpaid field, that brings a lot of privilege, right? Like even me saying that I volunteered for 3 years for a project before I got hired, I was lucky to do that because I had a full-time job, right? Most people, especially those coming from marginalized communities, they don't have the ability to work for free, right? And that's why you do see who you see in these wildlife roles. And so I feel so fortunate that the Yellowstone Wolf Project is extremely diverse. We are a team led primarily by women, women of color, people of color. And so I feel so proud to be a part of that team. But, it is sad to kind of interact and collaborate with all of these other people in these outside spaces, wildlife fields, and I never see anyone who looks like me.
Is that changing?
I think it is changing, yep, and something that I pride myself on in my role here as an educator is trying to diversify the field. So a couple times a year, I make sure to bring students from these underrepresented communities out into nature, into the field to see what conservation is all about, but then to also see someone like me in the field doing something, for them to have someone to look up to like I didn't have growing up.
Are there some groups that you would recommend or that you work with that you really...
My closest partner is Conservation Nation. Okay. So although they did fund me for my first year, I was their first inaugural fellow in 2022. I wouldn't support their mission if I didn't truly believe in it. And I do. I really see them putting their money where their mouth is. They are constantly bringing different marginalized groups all around the world to experience what it means to be involved in conservation, to show that they are important, they have a place in this field. And so I feel very strongly about being able to continue to push that on forward.
I said this earlier when we were rolling around, but yes, you don't look like what I imagine, a conservationist or somebody working for the National Park System would look like. And so I also, though, you have this confidence and this vibe and this energy that is just radiating, so much joy. And it's very attractive. I think you having that in being in this kind of role is very powerful. You're very approachable. I think it gives people somebody a door or access, and just a lot of people are afraid to talk to like people in power or so I don't know, do you ever think about that?
Yeah, totally. Something that I have made sure to utilize in this role is my ability to bring out volunteers and give other people the same opportunity that Jeremy had given me. He very easily could have said no. And had he done that, I think that my life would look very different than it does now. And so I do realize what a privilege I have to work in this iconic place full-time, year-round, studying this big, sexy megafauna. And so I feel that I owe it to others, to the next generations, to be able to give them the ability to see what it means to be in the field working with such a controversial species, but also just to give them that chance to put this on a resume, right? To put on a resume that you worked and volunteered with Yellowstone Wolf Project is big, and it will help push their career further.
Okay, so let's talk about wolves. I am absolutely in love with wolves. I literally have had wolf posters on my wall and now photos since I was a kid, and I have carried them around, I think, for decades now. But a lot of people romanticize wolves. A lot of people fear wolves. They're very controversial, and I want to see if you can share a little bit about the current state of wolves and then contrast that with what's going on here in Yellowstone.
Yeah, I think the media does a really good job of painting wolves in a very negative light, right? Even as young kids, we grow up hearing these scary stories, the Three Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood, right? The wolf is going to eat grandma. Even in, 2023, 2024, Disney's pumping out movies, animated movies, showing wolves actively trying to attack and kill people. And so this narrative is constantly being pushed that wolves are these big, scary creatures that you should fear. And obviously I've had an entirely different experience, right? I quite literally have fallen in love with these animals, these wild animals that I've had the ability to observe from miles and miles away, just because they are so charismatic and spunky, and there are certain wolves that I see myself in, and I watch others, visitors that I share with, longtime watchers and biologists also fall in love with these animals. And so I think being able to share the truth about wolves, about what it means to coexist with them, about how they are as large carnivores, is so important, because that's something that's lacking all around the globe. It's just a lack of education, and people don't really know what it means or what these large carnivores do or how they act.
What do you personally love about the wolves right now?
You know, when I was asking Doug Smith to hire me for my job, he told me not to fall in love with the wolves.
Oops.
He said, they don't live a long time. Don't fall in love with them. They're wild animals. And, I just kind of shrugged him off. I'm like, yeah, no problem. That's not going to be an issue. And then I fell in love with my very first wolf, 1229 of the Junction Butte pack. And she was so spunky. She literally moved to the beat of her own drum. Grass never grew under her feet. She would dangle off of bison tails just because she could. She was quite comfortable with people, and so people were always having these intimate encounters with her. And it wasn't until she was trapped and shot outside of the park that I really understood what Doug meant. Because she was killed in 2022, and now, 4 years later, I can just talk about it without getting choked up. Because I felt so strongly for this animal, and she didn't even know me, right? And so I think that's the magic and the beauty of what it means to be able to watch these animals just being on the landscape. And so I think right now my favorite thing about watching wolves is just to see their community, right? They're this family unit, and just like you are with your own family, sometimes you fight and you have these, skirmishes and you want to be left alone. And you might be this lone wolf per se, but at the end of the day, you're seeing them come back together and rally and share these beautiful moments together. And so I think that's my favorite part, is just watching them be, right, and just exist.
I've asked myself a lot what it is about wolves, and I wonder what it is about wolves generally that really attracts people. And obviously they're cute and fuzzy and furry, and I read American Wolf, and that was the first time I started to, I think, understand what it was, as I got to understand the pack dynamic and the individual personalities, and how we as humans are not too dissimilar from wolves. And me personally, all my life, I've, wrestled with issues with identity and belonging. And, I grew up as an adoptee, grew up in a really beautiful family and community. And I love that, but I still never felt like this connection. And I think I see now, as I observe the wolves and their commitment to each other and the family dynamic, and even just how fucking smart they are. And it's fascinating. I think there is something about that draws me in. There's a lot of things that are obviously really cool about wolves, but, and I think for other people, it conjures a sense of fear, or there's a lot of things that I think people maybe see something in themselves, or it kind of in some way is a metaphor for things that are going on in the world or their lives. I don't know. I've thought about that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think something that provides me with a unique perspective that a lot of people don't have the chance to experience is that I get to see all sides of wolves. A lot of times people fear these bloodthirsty killers. They're going to eat your children. They're going to rip everything to shreds. And sure, right? Wolves are predators. They're large carnivores. Of course they're going to kill things to survive. They literally have only their teeth to bring something down. But then I also see the beauty in the wolves, right? I see the moms bringing their pups out for the very first time and nuzzling them and nursing them, and the brothers and the sisters caring for these puppies and helping them explore their new worlds. And so I think that it's so magical that I get to see wolves in this whole full rounded circle, right, that a lot of people don't get the chance to experience. And so something that I hope to continue to do going forward is to share the stories and the lives of wolves where, yeah, I might show them bringing down a bison, right, which can be gruesome and really hard to watch, but then I'm also going to show them wagging their tails as they hunt ducks in the local river or whatever it is.
One of the things, I never saw them as individuals before, that when I started talking to people as I got really into wolves, I heard some of the folks referring to them as individuals, and then I really went headfirst after American Wolf into some of Rick McIntyre's books, and I keep getting stuck on Wolf 21, and he is this big badass wolf that could probably crush any wolf in the park, but he had so much empathy, and not only with his pups and how he would make himself small and play with them and, give them a chance to learn. And I think he genuinely, it seems, not to anthropomorphize, however you say that word, I can never say it right, but it seemed like he actually, he was probably doing his job, teaching them, but also he continued to do it, and then how he would, I don't think, this could be wrong, but I don't think he killed any of his enemies. Like, he could have, but he taught him a lesson, or defended his territory, protected his family, and when they got the message, he let them go. And that is not a behavior that I ever thought wolves. I thought they were these vicious, like bloodthirsty, just genetically wired to kill kind of creatures. And I've learned that that's not the case necessarily.
Yeah, and I think, again, Yellowstone is a unique system. Like, I'm fully aware of that. And when I do talk to people who might have opposing views as me than wolves, on wolves or other large carnivores, a lot of the things that they say is, it's just a wolf. Like, it's just another animal. Like, who cares? You can shoot, kill, 200 of them, and their population will be just fine. And that might be true, right? But they don't see the individuals, like you say. All I see is individuals. I do not see a population, Yellowstone wolf population. I see each individual wolf and the impact that they have on their pack. And you might just shoot one wolf, but what if you shoot the wrong wolf, right? And that can decimate an entire pack. And so I think Yellowstone is so special in that it gives people the ability to come from all over the world to have the chance to experience what we're experiencing as well. And one of my favorite things, this isn't really about that, but we can get people all the time who aren't big fans of wolves or predators, right? And they want to tell me that. They need to make sure. But then they ask if they can look at the wolves through my scope. Right? And that, yes, you can. Yes, cool. That's key.
Yeah, talking to some other folks, I've listened to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books. And, one thing I've heard is that, Yellowstone is a great starting point, and it helps people really get an understanding and a foundation. But like the behavior of wolves in Yellowstone might be different than how they're behaving in, say, Idaho, northern Idaho, or Montana, or Washington, because whether it's the terrain or their, prey species in the area or their threats, so the packs and, the actual wolves themselves are individuals, and it's just, it's not apples to apples, when it comes to looking at the outcomes and management.
Absolutely. And that's something that I constantly need to remind myself. Like, I am living a little bit of a fantasy world here in Yellowstone, right? These wolves are protected by 2 million acres. And so our wolves here in the park, they're far more susceptible to becoming habituated or tolerant with people in the landscape. And so you do see different behaviors in wolves in the park where they are used to 5 million visitors every year, as opposed to those wolves in Idaho, rural Montana, where they are being shot at all the time or having really negative encounters with people, right? And that's something that I think I need to recognize as a researcher and as an educator, to be able to share that and just understand that, like, my experiences with wolves can be very, very different from someone else's experiences with wolves.
Okay, so I and everybody wants to know, as a member of the Yellowstone Wolf Project, what is your actual official role at?
Yep. So I'm kind of transitioning out of the role as a biological science technician. That's my role with the project. So a road technician.
Okay. And what does the day in the life of a road technician look like?
Yeah, each day is different, which is what makes the job so magical. But, in the summer months, I'm waking up around 2:30 a.m. every day. Wolves are crepuscular, which means they're active at dawn and dusk. And so I want to be out here radio tracking our wolves before the sun comes up. just hoping to get an eyes on them. And in the summer in particular, especially around June, early July, we're working on pup counts. So how many puppies were born, how many black versus gray, who are we seeing from the pack, what are they doing? And then just doing a lot of visitor education, helping people get eyes on wolves, talking to them about what it means to have wolves in a healthy ecosystem.
What's the coolest thing that you have done that you can tell us?
Oh, gosh. I think wolf capture is obviously extremely magical, right? I can recognize these individuals from 4 or 5 miles away. So to be able to see them then up close and personal, it's quite special. And then I think any encounter that I have involving wolves and grizzly bears is something that I cherish. So wolf grizzly bear interactions is my favorite thing to observe in Yellowstone. So having the opportunity to see our wolf packs kind of go head to head to grizzly bears is something that I enjoy.
What is the craziest thing you've seen that you can talk about?
Craziest thing I've seen. One of the first, earliest parts of my time here in the park, I watched a mother grizzly bear kick her cub out, now sub-adult, to kind of experience the world on his own. And sub-adult grizzly bears, they kind of have pea brains, so they're not the brightest.
Like teenage boys.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so we had a young grizzly bear kind of rolling around in the wildflowers with his, on its back, picking dandelions. And then all of a sudden, a yearling wolf, so just a teenage wolf, comes over and is kind of jumping on the bear, and they're rolling around in the wildflowers and just having fun. And it was the most adorable thing I'd ever experienced. And it was like this moment before they realize these are these two top predators who will soon be competing for the same resources. And so it was magical to see that.
Are there any cases where you've seen that, witnessed it, and then seen them as adults be friends and amicable?
Not that I have seen. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened, right? I see wolves and bears feeding peacefully at carcasses all the time. Whether or not it's those same two, it's hard to say.
That's crazy. I dream of that. Like, that's what's happening when the lights get shut off and we're all, sleeping peacefully. That's what they're out here doing.
You never know.
Coexisting.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the things that I think as a watcher and somebody who loves being outdoors, it's really, really hard to be in the outdoors and to go to national parks and outdoor recreations anymore because they are so crowded. They are full of people taking photos, more focused on their social media, and it's very controversial. In my day job, working with a lot of outdoor brands, we try to be good stewards. So we're not asking our fans and social followers to go out and do stuff that's going to, be detrimental to these spaces that we want to protect. Are there things that you see, things that you could talk about and share with listeners? So if they are coming out here, what are things happening? What are real situations that we need to be aware of that, make your job harder?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we need to continue to follow the leave no trace. Like, leave places as you saw them. However, I think what I'm experiencing the most, just kind of as my role here, seeing people continuously approaching large carnivores, wolves, grizzly bears, black bears, too close of distances, often for like their social media selfie or, just a cell phone photo in general. And I think we need to be cognizant when coming into a national park to realize, like, these are wild animals. This is their home and we are visitors. And so, following park rules, making sure that you're maintaining that legal distance from an animal or any distance that you might be altering their behavior. If you are 2 miles away from a pack of wolves or a grizzly bear and that animal is noticeably uncomfortable by you, you need to move. And wildlife doesn't know that there is a distance that you need to maintain. So if animals are approaching you, it is up to you as a human to remove yourself from the situation. And I think my biggest tip is do not feed wildlife. It's not cute. and it ends up being really dangerous for the animal. And so you might get a really cool photo or video of this encounter, but then you go home and you don't understand the consequences and the long-lasting impacts that it has on these individuals. I do. And
For example, like if an animal gets fed and it's habituated and comfortable with people, if it steps out of the park and it approaches somebody and they happen to be a hunter, likely that hunter, if it's hunting season or not, even in some cases, they might get shot.
Yep, they'll get shot. Some of the wolves that I've loved the most have died at the hands of humans outside of the park. I have watched wolves that I care a lot about be hit by cars because they're too comfortable walking on the road corridor in the middle of the daytime. I have seen wolves being fed human food in the park. And the saying, a fed bear is a dead bear, is true. We do not see anything good come out of that. And so, again, although it might be something that's exhilarating in the moment for you, I want, some of us to just think about our actions and the implications that it'll have going forward. Yeah.
So, yeah, the social media thing and people getting too close. I mean, I've seen some really friggin' beautiful photos online here in the park and elsewhere, and it's really inspiring. It does help tell the story of these parks and these places and these animals, but there is a fine line. That said, I found you, thanks to social media. You do an incredible job of advocating for your work in this place and also representing yourself, as an underrepresented person in this space in so many different ways. Can you tell me a little bit about, the role of storytelling in this work? I mean, is that part of your job? I mean, is it celebrated? Are there, do you see these groups and parks and like government institutions actually trying to take advantage of this in a good way? Because I think it's really important. Education.
Yeah, I would say education is a big part of my role. However, social media is not. And so I think that I kind of took that upon myself to start being able to use my advantage of being in the park every day to document these stories and be able to share them with people no matter where they're at. I am a firm believer of social media being the devil. Right? But it is also an incredibly amazing place to get information out to a large audience very quickly. And I think that one of the things that I'm so proud of is being able to share the lives of these animals that I love so dearly with others who then also love them. I ran into a visitor the other day in the park. She came up to me. She was in tears, and she was 60 years old, and she said, I'm just a 60-year-old woman, and I know this sounds really weird, but your page is the reason that I'm here, that I'm watching wolves, that my daughter is going to study wildlife biology. And that's one of those things where, it really reminds you that the work you're doing is important, that, even if others don't necessarily appreciate my presence on social media, that it is doing good and is bringing awareness to wolves, to wildlife, to what it means to be, an ethical watcher in the park.
What is the hardest part of doing your job?
I think the hardest part for me is maintaining some semblance of professionalism. I do work with one of the most controversial species in the world. And so being able to have conversations that are respectful with people on either side of the spectrum, whether they're extremely pro-wolf or extremely anti-wolf, is something that has taken me many years to figure out. I am very opinionated. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and so people know exactly what I'm feeling and thinking without even having to say anything. And so I think that for me, I've grown a lot in the last 7 years in being able to recognize different experiences, seeing things, through a different lens. And so just being able to have those hard conversations, but in a respectful way, where, being kind gets your point across far better than, just being a jerk about it.
I think that's a lesson everybody could kind of take to heart for sure. Why are wolves so controversial?
I just think, it's such a lack of education. I think there's a big, generational push behind a lot of the misinformation regarding wolves. And again, it's just the media continuing to only push negative stories that involve wolves. Maybe, great grandpa had a really negative encounter with wolves 80 years ago, which then pushes into his grandson and his son and whatever it is. And so I really do think it's just a lack of education, right? There's this narrative that wolves are killing all of the livestock, or that wolves have killed all of the elk, right? Or they're going to continue to, the population is going to continue to grow. I had someone reach out to me and tell me that they're going to kill all of the bison and then the tourists next, right? And so it's just a lack of education. They don't know. They don't know any better.
So if you were to kind of explain what the Yellowstone Wolf Project does, it's one part education. I guess the other thing I'd want to ask is, or the one thing that I think could help set the stage for folks is, why was the Yellowstone Wolf Project introduced? Why were wolves reintroduced in 1995 back to Yellowstone?
Yeah, in the early 1900s, wolves were eradicated completely from the western part of the United States, partially due to that fear-mongering we just talked about, right? They're killing everything off. There's no need to have them on the ecosystem. And then, the ecosystem went over 70 years without having wolves. And it wasn't until the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started deliberating with the park, and they did finally come to the decision to reintroduce the first set of wolves back into Yellowstone. So 30 or so wolves were brought down from Alberta, Canada, and put back into the park for the very first time in these acclimation pens. So there were 3 different packs put back into the park. They were fenced in these enclosures for about 10 weeks before being released into the park, where wolves could roam wild for the very first time in over 70 years. And the Yellowstone Wolf Project was a big part of that. So Dr. Doug Smith, he was head of the reintroduction at the time and of the project. And, now, 30 years later, after that reintroduction, we have seen wolves recolonize the western part of the United States, and quite literally help shape the way that Yellowstone ecosystem functions as a whole. I think it's a big misconception that wolves were the primary reason for Yellowstone's bounce back, right? They forget to mention that beavers were reintroduced at the same time as wolves, right? Mountain lions were recolonizing themselves. There were a lot of different factors going into Yellowstone kind of coming out in working ecologically. But wolves are ecosystem engineers. They're a really big part of how this ecosystem functions properly.
In your words, and from where you're sitting, where are wolves now? And just globally, how are they doing?
I think wolves are still incredibly misunderstood, but I also think that an increasing tolerance is happening.
Oh.
And just in my 7 years here, I am seeing this shift in attitudes towards large carnivores overall. Wolf watching brings in over $80 million to the surrounding economies of Yellowstone. And so Yellowstone wolves in particularly are $1 million wolves. And so people care more about paying money to see grizzly bears in the wild and wolves in the wild and the chance to see the elusive mountain lion than they do maybe going hunting, right? Or whatever it is. So I am seeing an increase in tolerance, which is amazing.
That's really interesting. I want to do some comparisons. I mean, I'm sure the hunting industry is massive, and you look at like cattle ranching and the revenue opportunity across those different spaces, but it is, not to put a number on them, but it's not just because they're cute and squishy. They do something positive to play a role in this park ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, Yellowstone would not be the same, if we got rid of wolves again. And I think that it's magical to be amongst such a successful rewilding event, right? But now even shifting into seeing these rewilding events happen still, right? Wolves are reintroduced into Colorado, right? They're talking about bringing back wolverines. And so we're seeing all of these things going on. And it's incredible to kind of right the wrongs that humans have made, right, in previous years.
Absolutely. Yeah. What is your take? I'm sure you're aware of everyone from California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and all of the projects out there. do you pay attention to those?
Yeah, I do. Not super closely. I think I follow like the Voyagers Wolf Project in Minnesota pretty heavily, and then I am very heavily invested in the Colorado wolf reintroduction and their project that they have going on there. We worked very closely with some of their lead wolf biologists there, and so it's just really interesting to see different perspectives from different stakeholders kind of involved in the situations, and what would I have done differently, what would I've not, and so it's easy to say what you would and wouldn't do when you're not the one in the situation, but we talked about this briefly, but I would really like to be involved in Colorado potentially, working as a range rider, helping these ranchers coexist, learn what it means to live with wolves after 70 years without them, and then just kind of give them the help that they might be needing as someone who studies wolf behavior.
Yeah, the Colorado project's pretty controversial, and I'd err on caution saying that it doesn't seem like it's going how they hoped. I still, is there hope? I mean, there's always hope, right? But it seems like there's something to be learned from that project. I was listening to a podcast with Pacific Wild the other day, and they were talking about the BC wolves, and this gentleman, his name is Mark. He's I think he was heavily involved in the Colorado project, and I think he's a professor at one of the colleges there. I can't remember, but he was saying how he was kind of unhappy with the reintroduction, and he actually was not pro. I may not include this, but it was really fascinating because he struggles with the idea of like you're actually displacing and disrupting an ecosystem by extracting wolves from BC or Oregon, I think in that case, and then you're asking the wolves after drugging them, putting them in a plane, bringing only half their family with them, to thrive and survive, and then on the ground you don't have your policy figured out. You have all the issues with the anti-wolf stakeholders. So he's like, I love the idea, but he's like, I just don't think this is how we do it. And it was really interesting.
It's so tough, right? I feel like it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Yeah. I feel for all parties involved. I feel for them. I don't have much to say on it because I'm just not educated enough on the entire situation. In theory, it's an incredible idea, and I think animals belong in a space that they once were, right? Like, who are we to say that there should not be this animal here because we don't want them there, but I think that it's such a nuanced
absolutely
situation.
It is incredibly, I don't know how to articulate this. I've talked to a couple people about it, but why do we as humans, one of Mother Nature's creatures, get to decide for all these other creatures? People say, well, survival of the fittest and the alpha, we're the apex predator, and I'm like, yeah, but even apex predators in the wild, there is a balance, and they take what they need. There are some that might more gratuitously enjoy a kill. I don't know. I don't know animals to that extent, but you look at look at what 21 did, and how he didn't always kill, and you look at they eat what they need and then they share it. They even share it, Bears, I've seen on your posts and some of the posts I've seen on social media, they're coexisting and they all support each other within this ecosystem, so I just think it's wild that humans.
Yeah, for sure. And, I try to be patient with people who want to be aggressive in their approach when chatting with me. And my biggest frustration is someone who really wants to push the narrative that wolves kill for sport. They're killing for fun, right? Well, hunting is the second leading cause of death for wolves in Yellowstone. They're not going to kill something 10 times their size for the fun of it. But 9 times out of 10, those same people who are pushing that narrative to me, their profile pictures of them with their trophy bull elk. I just cannot get behind that. Again, I'm very open-minded and I totally am up for a conversation. But if you're going to talk about sport hunting while actively sport hunting, it gets to be a bit frustrating for sure.
Well, it's wild because you think about, again, I don't know how to articulate this. I think our industrial food system's so fucked, like the things that we put in our body. So I support this idea of sustenance, living, and And even I would love to do my own farming, have a cow that I could, butcher and know where it came from. And, I have friends who hunt and they get an elk, they eat it all year, they have it processed, and that's a part of, their thing. And I totally respectful. The wild thing that I think about is like we have to eat at grocery stores because our government has subsidized cattle ranching and all these industries that are displacing, our, wildlife that we could potentially be hunting. Our hunters are fighting against, wildlife and conservationists and all these things. It's like this weird, it's like they're like, here, we're going to make you dance so you can fight over things while we make money. Like it's
absolutely,
yeah.
And something I want to emphasize, I'm not anti-hunting. I'm not anti-wolf hunting. I'm not anti-hunting for sustenance. I'm not even against trophy hunting, right? But it does get to be quite frustrating when you are constantly dealing with people who are pissed off at predators for literally needing to eat to survive, right? I just can't get behind it. And, one of my biggest arguments is like, do you hate all predators or is it just wolves, right? Are you cheering for the lions that just took down a gazelle, right? It's just a different system. It's the same exact process. So yeah, it's been interesting having not had another job before this one, and then being thrown into America's most political species. It was an eye opener, and it took a lot of adjusting to kind of figure out how to navigate some of these spaces.
Yeah, how are you doing? I don't know if I'm on the outside and I see it all play out on social media for the most part, and in the media. And I get anxious and overwhelmed, and I think I cry or want to cry so many times when I just see these feeds and these things people are saying and doing.
Yeah, I think my biggest tip for people is to just go in with an open mind, right? A lot of these people who have hate in their heart for wolves or bears or whatever it is, almost always it's because they have had a negative experience with them or know someone who has a negative experience with them. And I really take that into perspective, right? I love wolves, but how would I feel about wolves if they killed my pet dog, right? Even if they're behaving naturally, so that can make you jaded to certain things. And so that's something that I really, really try to take into consideration when I'm talking to all of these different groups is just be open-minded, be open to dialogue, and be willing to share, but also listen to others. That's really the only way you're going to see any change happen.
That was really well said. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time here, and I want to get you out of here soon so you can have your day back, since you're usually getting up at the butt crack of dawn and weekends are precious. What are some myths about wolves that you could share, maybe, or at least, the top myth about wolves that you think is, and the top thing that is misunderstood about wolves?
I think similar to what we talked about, that like wolves are killing for fun. I go to hundreds and hundreds of carcasses every single year of wolf kills, and they have consumed the entirety of it. Often when they are leaving things behind, it's almost always due to human interference, right? I think a silly myth that people ask me about all the time is, do wolves howl at the moon? No. They're howling pretty much early mornings and evenings with or without the moon. And then I just think, something that I want to mention to visitors and just people in general listening to this is that wolves are sentient beings, right? Just like a lot of our creatures, and they might not have feelings the way that we do, but they operate kind of in their own way. And so I think thinking about that moving forward, when you are getting to view any type of animal out in the wild, just to know, right, they're a living being and they're important and they have some type of importance to whatever space that they're occupying.
Yeah, I think they're more like humans, as I've learned more and more about wolves, than almost any other creature that I've learned about or had experience with. Obviously monkeys, primates, apes, and they're probably the closest, but it's pretty crazy. Wolves are a lot more like people and humans than I ever thought, and it didn't take going too far to really start to figure that out. So I definitely encourage people, pick up American Wolf if you are curious. It is a great, approachable read. It's really interesting. It talks about the wolf reintroduction. I literally cried probably at least 20 times. Second time I read it, same thing. Like, it was so good. And I hear they're making a movie about it. I really hope to see that come to life, and I've got my fingers crossed that it turns out good. I guess, is there anything that you would like to share with people, projects that you think are really freaking cool that are out there that people should know about?
I think something that I was able to participate in is called the National Wolf Conversation. It got perspectives from all different people involved in the wolf kind of situation. And so I really recommend people go to that website and read about what was being done, experiences others have, and kind of what came out of that week together. And then, I think anytime anyone can support our project, the Yellowstone Wolf Project, we do good work with education, Yellowstone Forever, the nonprofit. I think, read about all of our work online.
What about the Cry Wolf Project?
The Cry Wolf Project.
So sick.
Yep. So we just started a new bioacoustics project here in Yellowstone, trying to answer a variety of different questions using wolf vocalizations. One of the biggest ones being right now is, can we count the number of wolves based on howling alone? And that would be incredible if that's something that we can accomplish, because it could change the game in terms of wildlife management around the globe, right? And so right now we're still kind of in the process of setting out our autonomous recording units and still kind of getting our AI classifier up to great standards. But I think that we're going to push out some really cool work here in the coming years.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about that, and I feel like beyond even just wolves, there's so much that could be learned from that work. It's really exciting to imagine what you can take from that. I'm very nervous about AI and its potential, but this is one of those examples of positive outcomes from that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say I appreciate everyone listening to some of the things I have to say. I'm excited to be moving on to a new adventure here in a couple months. I'm going to be starting graduate school, doing human-wildlife conflict involving Yellowstone wolves, their comfortableness around humans, and the effects of our hazing that we do here in the park. So I hope you all can stay up to date with some of the work that I'm doing, and I appreciate Molly having me here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.